A black woman walks into a public safety building on the day the system is being reshaped. No badge, no escort, no name anyone recognizes. The looks she gets aren't professional. They're cold, dismissive, loaded. This is a place built to protect the law, but not everyone here believes the law applies equally. And before anyone realizes who she really is, a line gets crossed, one that can't be undone. Riverton City looks calm on the surface, clean streets, busy offices, a place people describe as stable and well-run. But stability can be misleading. Beneath the routines and polished reports, some systems survive by protecting themselves, not the people they are meant to serve. For years, Riverton's public safety institutions operated without major disruption. Complaints were filed, reviews were conducted, nothing truly changed. Not because problems were unknown, but because they were inconvenient. When a system learns that silence works, silence becomes policy. Angela Brooks understood this before she ever stepped inside the building. She did not come in disguise. She did not come to trap anyone or prove a point. She came without announcing herself because she wanted to see the truth in its natural state. No warnings, no preparation, no masks. That morning, she entered the Metropolitan Public Safety Building like any ordinary visitor. No badge on display, no escort walking beside her, no name that carried weight in that room. To the people behind the desks, she was just another face. And that was exactly the point. The reactions came quickly. Not openly hostile, not dramatic, just small, practiced behaviors. A delayed response at the front desk, a glance that lingered a second too long, a tone that was polite in words but dismissive in meaning. These moments were easy to miss. That is why they mattered. One staff member avoided eye contact while pretending to scroll through a screen. Another answered her question without looking up. When Angela spoke, she noticed how often she was interrupted, how often her presence seemed to inconvenience the flow of the room. No one said anything explicitly offensive. No rules were broken on paper. But the message was clear. She was not important. Not here. Not yet. This is how systems reveal themselves, not through grand gestures, but through habits, through what people do when they believe there are no consequences. When power feels comfortable, courtesy becomes optional. There is a concept often discussed in organizational psychology. Some call it the anonymity test, others call it the unguarded moment. It describes what happens when authority assumes it is not being watched. In those moments, behavior stops being performative and starts being honest. Angela observed quietly. She did not challenge the tone. She did not correct the assumptions. She let the room continue as it always had. Because interrupting the process too early would only produce rehearsed behavior, and rehearsed behavior hides the truth. As she moved deeper into the building, the patterns repeated. A request redirected without explanation. A simple question answered with impatience. A remark made under someone's breath, low enough to deny, loud enough to hear. Each interaction carried the same underlying judgment. Respect here was conditional. It had to be earned through status, not humanity. No alarms sounded. No one raised their voice. But the air grew heavier with every step. The system was not broken in one dramatic way. It was worn down by 1,000 small permissions. Angela did not write anything down. She did not record conversations. She relied on memory and observation. She had learned long ago that the most revealing evidence is not always documented. It is repeated. What she was witnessing was not cruelty. It was normalization, the kind that develops when people learn they can look away without consequence, when discomfort becomes routine. when fairness is delayed long enough to be forgotten. This was the real test, not of individuals, but of culture. How do people act towards someone who appears to have no power? How much patience do they offer? How much dignity? In Riverton, the answer was clear. Courtesy here was reserved. It was rationed, and it flowed upward, never down. Angela remained composed. Her posture did not change. Her voice stayed level. She asked only what was necessary and waited for the responses to come, however slowly they arrived. Around her, no one suspected anything unusual. There was no sense of urgency, no recognition that the system was being measured. That was the most telling part of all, because when a system believes it is safe, it stops pretending. By the time Angela reached the inner offices, the pattern had fully formed. This was not about one bad interaction. It was about consistency, about how easily indifference had settled into routine. And as she stood there, still unrecognized, one truth became unavoidable. A system is only polite when it believes you matter. Daniel Crawford entered the floor with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. His uniform was pressed. His steps were unhurried. Conversations around him softened without being told to. This was not respect earned in the moment. It was authority accumulated over time. He had been there for years, long enough to shape the rhythm of the building, long enough for people to learn when to speak and when to stay quiet. His voice was firm, steady, and practiced, not loud, not emotional, just certain. When he spoke, others listened. When he paused, the room waited. Patrol Unit B stood nearby, not in formation, not officially involved, just present enough to be seen. Their posture said they were observers, not participants, but observation has weight, and in moments like this, neutrality is a choice. Angela addressed Crawford calmly. She followed procedure. She asked for assistance using the correct language. Nothing confrontational, nothing demanding, just a request routed through the system as it was designed. The response was immediate, but not helpful. Crawford questioned her presence before addressing her request. His eyes scanned her, not the paperwork. He asked why she was there, not what she needed. The tone was polite on the surface, but the implication was clear. She was out of place. Angela repeated her request, short, controlled, precise. Crawford smirked, not openly, just enough to signal dismissal. He suggested she wait. He suggested she was confused. He suggested there were procedures she did not understand. Around them, Patrol Unit B shifted their weight. One officer checked a watch, another looked at the floor. No one stepped forward. No one intervened. No one corrected the tone. The room adjusted itself around Crawford's authority. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She asked again, this time referencing policy. That was when the atmosphere changed. Crawford's posture stiffened. His patience thinned. Being questioned was not part of his routine, especially not by someone he had already categorized as insignificant. He leaned closer, not aggressively, not yet, just enough to assert space. He warned her about disrupting operations. He implied consequences without naming them. His words were still within regulation. His intent was not. This was the next step. The escalation that happens when power feels challenged but not threatened enough to retreat. Patrol Unit B remained silent. Their silence did not slow the moment. It accelerated it. Angela stood her ground. She did not move back. She did not apologize. She waited. That pause mattered. It forced Crawford to choose his next move. He chose pressure. He signaled for documentation. He questioned her credentials again. He framed her request as interference. He used language that sounded procedural but carried accusation. Each word tightened the situation without crossing a visible line. This is how abuse of authority often operates, not through explosions, but through increments. Each step justified by the last, each action softened by the assumption that no one will stop it. Angela requested to speak with internal governance. That name landed differently. It did not intimidate Crawford. It annoyed him. He laughed, quietly, the kind of laugh meant for allies, not the person being dismissed. It told the room how seriously to take her. Patrol Unit B absorbed the cue. Their expressions remained neutral, but their bodies angled away. The message traveled without words. Crawford stepped closer again. This time the distance was deliberate. His voice dropped. He warned her about making false claims. He hinted at consequences that could follow her out of the building. Angela did not respond immediately. She allowed the moment to stretch. Silence can be unsettling when it interrupts authority. Crawford mistook it for weakness. He raised his voice slightly, not enough to draw attention from other floors, enough to establish dominance. He told her to leave the area. He framed it as instruction. He framed her presence as a disruption. Angela asked one final time for procedural support. That was when the line was crossed. Not with violence, not yet. With permission. Crawford waved her concern away. Patrol Unit B did nothing. No one challenged the tone. No one corrected the misuse of authority. The room accepted it, and acceptance is a powerful accelerant. This is the moment most people misunderstand. Violence does not begin with impact. It begins when behavior goes unchecked. When small abuses are tolerated. When silence is rewarded with comfort. Every step up to this point had been allowed, encouraged by inaction, protected by routine. Angela remained where she was, calm, still, present. Crawford's frustration sharpened. His authority, which had always worked, was failing to move her. That failure demanded a response. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Patrol Unit B stood where they were, close enough to see, far enough to deny responsibility. And in that space, the system did what it had been trained to do. It escalated. Not because one man was evil, but because many people had learned that looking away was safer than stepping in. The moment was no longer about procedure. It was about power being tested. And power, when accustomed to permission, rarely stops itself. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not repeat herself again. She simply changed how she spoke. Her tone became firmer, not louder, not sharper, just steady, controlled, clear. The kind of voice used by someone who understands procedure, not someone asking for permission. She addressed Crawford directly. She referenced policy again, this time without explanation. She stated what should happen next, not what she wanted. That shift was subtle, but it mattered. Crawford noticed it immediately. He straightened his posture. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in confusion. Something about the exchange had changed, and he could not place it. Angela was still standing where she had been, still calm, still composed, but she was no longer reacting to him. She was speaking as if the process mattered more than his presence. That unsettled him. Power expects resistance. It expects pleading, apology, or retreat. It is prepared for confrontation. What it does not expect is composure that refuses to acknowledge fear. Crawford interrupted her. His voice cut across the room, sharper than before. He corrected her phrasing. He questioned her authority to speak that way. He reminded her, indirectly, who was in charge. Angela waited until he finished. Then she continued. She did not match his tone. She did not justify herself. She simply repeated the procedural requirement and stated the next step again. Around them, the room went quiet. Not the quiet of attention, the quiet of discomfort. Patrol Unit B avoided eye contact. One officer shifted position, stepping back slightly. Another crossed his arms, creating distance without leaving. No one spoke. No one supported either side. This silence carried weight. Crawford sensed it. He felt the pause stretch longer than it should have. Authority depends on momentum, and momentum was slipping. He stepped closer, not aggressively, not yet, but close enough to reassert control of the space. He lowered his voice again, speaking only to her this time. He warned her about overstepping. He suggested that her behavior could be documented. The words were calm. The threat was not. Angela looked at him. She did not flinch. She did not step back. She acknowledged the statement with a brief nod and responded with one sentence. She told him that any documentation would need to follow proper review channels. That was enough. Crawford's expression changed. The certainty he carried faltered just for a moment. His authority had always worked because it went unchallenged. Not challenged loudly, not challenged quietly. Angela was doing neither. She was treating his position as part of a system, not the system itself. That distinction stripped away the illusion he depended on. His breathing grew heavier. He spoke again, this time faster. His words overlapped slightly. He accused her of being uncooperative. He framed her calmness as defiance. The room absorbed the shift. Tension settled into the air. No one moved. Angela remained still. This is where power begins to lose control, not when it is attacked, but when it is ignored. Crawford raised his voice just enough to draw attention. He repeated his order. He gestured toward the exit. He expected movement. There was none. Angela did not comply. She did not argue. She simply stayed where she was. That moment stretched longer than any before it. Power hates uncertainty. It thrives on predictable reactions. When those reactions fail to appear, it seeks to restore balance by force. Crawford's frustration was no longer contained. His face flushed. His words came out harsher. He accused her of provoking the situation. He implied consequences again, this time without subtlety. Patrol Unit B remained silent. Their silence was no longer neutral. It was enabling. Angela spoke again. Her voice did not change, but her words did. She told him she was invoking oversight procedure. That was the final trigger. Crawford laughed, sharp and dismissive. He shook his head as if to reassure himself. He said her claim meant nothing. He said she did not understand how things worked here. He stepped closer again. Too close. The physical space between them closed. The line was no longer procedural. It was personal. Angela did not retreat. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to press inward. Conversations elsewhere faded into background noise. Everyone present understood something was about to happen. Crawford's authority, once comfortable and unchallenged, was now exposed. Not because it was weak, but because it had been built on fear, not respect. And fear reacts when it is denied. This was no longer about rules. It was about control slipping away. Power does not collapse quietly. It resists. It escalates. And when it does, it reveals its true nature. The silence in the room was complete. No one stepped in. No one spoke. And in that stillness, Crawford made his next move. The moment came without warning. Crawford took one step forward, then another. His voice rose again, but the words no longer mattered. His body was already speaking for him. Angela stood her ground. She did not move aside. She did not lift her hands. She did not escalate. That refusal was enough. He shoved her. Not a dramatic motion, not a scene meant for witnesses, just a forceful push, done with the certainty of someone who had never been stopped before. Angela lost her balance. Her foot caught on the edge of the floor mat. She fell backward. Her head struck the metal edge of the desk. The sound cut through the room. For a split second, everything froze. Angela was on the ground, one hand pressed against the floor, the other moved instinctively toward her head. She did not cry out. She did not shout. She stayed silent. That silence was heavier than any scream. The room did not rush toward her. No one stepped in immediately. No one called for help right away. A few officers turned their heads. One looked down at his shoes. Another pretended to check something on his radio. Others stood still, watching, but doing nothing. This was the real moment of the story. Not the shove, not the fall, but what followed. Because violence does not end with the act. It is completed by the reaction around it. Angela remained on the floor for several seconds, long enough for everyone to see her, long enough for everyone to decide what they would do. Some chose distance, some chose stillness. No one chose intervention. Crawford stepped back. His face registered surprise, not regret. He did not kneel. He did not apologize. He looked around the room, measuring the response. There was none. The silence told him what he needed to know. For years, moments like this had passed without consequence. Complaints softened, reports rewritten, language adjusted, incidents reframed. This was how harm survived. Angela slowly pushed herself upright. Her movements were controlled, deliberate. She did not rush. She did not dramatize her pain. Blood did not pour. There was no spectacle. Just a woman on the floor of a public safety building, collecting herself while the people sworn to protect others stood by. Now pause here. Imagine something else. Imagine that no one else entered the room afterward. Imagine that no one questioned what had just happened. Imagine that the door to oversight never opened. Imagine that Angela Brooks was exactly who she appeared to be in that moment. Just another woman. Just another black woman. No badge visible. No title spoken aloud. No authority confirmed. What happens next? Maybe the incident is written up as a misunderstanding. Maybe the shove is described as accidental contact. Maybe the fall becomes her fault. Maybe the report uses careful language, neutral language, language that protects the system. Maybe she is escorted out quietly. Maybe she goes home with a swollen head and a heavier question. What did I do wrong? Or maybe she does not even get a report. Because this is what usually happens. Most people who experience moments like this do not get a reveal. They do not get validation. They do not get justice served cleanly and publicly. They get silence. They get paperwork. They get told to move on. This is why this moment matters more than the shove itself. Because outside of this story, most victims never get the benefit of a twist. They do not get power stepping in to correct the imbalance. They live with the impact while the system stays intact. Back in the room, Angela stood. She did not accuse. She did not shout. She did not demand. She looked around. Her gaze moved slowly from one face to another. Some avoided her eyes. Some held them briefly, then looked away. That exchange revealed everything. Crawford said nothing. He did not need to. The room had already made a choice. By doing nothing, it had sided with him. This is how harm becomes normalized. Not through constant brutality, but through repeated permission. The permission to look away. The permission to stay silent. The permission to let one moment pass so the system can continue unchallenged. Angela steadied herself. She placed one hand on the desk for support. Her posture returned to upright. Her expression remained composed. But the atmosphere had changed. The tension was no longer hidden. It pressed down on everyone present. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. They had seen this before. They had survived it by staying quiet. But now the image was different. Now it was undeniable. A line had been crossed. And it had been crossed in front of everyone. This was no longer about procedure. It was about accountability. Angela took a breath. She said nothing yet. She did not need to. The room had already exposed itself. And whether anyone realized it or not, the consequences of that exposure were already set in motion. The room did not explode after the fall. It tightened. Every sound felt sharper. Every movement felt exposed. Angela stood upright now, one hand resting on the desk, her breathing steady. The mark on her head was visible. So was the silence around her. Then the door opened. Ethan Moore stepped inside. He did not rush. He did not shout. He carried a tablet in his hand and paused just long enough to take in the scene. Angela standing, Crawford rigid, Patrol Unit B frozen in place. Ethan looked at Angela first. She met his eyes and gave a brief nod. That was all. He turned to the tablet and tapped the screen. Once, then again. The room waited. Ethan spoke calmly. He identified himself and stated why he was there. His voice carried no accusation, no emotion, just information. He said he had been reviewing internal access logs as part of the restructuring process. He said something had caught his attention. Then he looked directly at Angela. He confirmed her identity, not with a dramatic announcement, not with a grand reveal, just a verification stated as fact. Angela Brooks, the director overseeing internal reform. The shift in the room was immediate. Postures changed. Eyes widened. A few officers inhaled sharply without realizing it. Crawford did not move at first. Then he laughed, short, uncertain. He said there must be a mistake. He said he had never been informed. He said anyone could claim a title. Ethan did not respond to the words. He turned the tablet so the screen faced outward. He displayed credentials, authorization codes, appointment records, dates and signatures. Everything was official. Everything was verifiable. The truth did not arrive as a sentence. It arrived as documentation. The room absorbed it slowly. Angela did not say a word. She did not need to. Crawford's face drained of color. His earlier confidence did not disappear all at once. It fractured. His eyes flicked around the room, searching for support. He found none. Ethan continued. He said there was more. He acknowledged that the security cameras in the area were currently listed as under maintenance, a detail Crawford seemed to latch onto with visible relief. But then Ethan tapped the tablet again. He explained that Angela had requested independent backups of internal data during the transition period, including archived footage, including time-stamped system logs. The camera had not been watching, but the system had. The shove, the fall, the moments before and after. Everything was there. Angela still did not speak. Power had already shifted, not because of her title, because of preparation. Crawford opened his mouth to respond, but Ethan continued before he could form a defense. He brought up a personnel file, an older one, years back, a recommendation denied, a promotion blocked, a disciplinary note that never should have existed. The name on the screen belonged to a black officer, highly rated, consistently effective, removed quietly after a series of questionable evaluations, each one signed by the same person, Daniel Crawford. The room went still again. This silence was different. It was no longer complicit. It was stunned. Ethan stated the pattern without commentary. He did not accuse. He did not editorialize. He allowed the information to stand on its own. This was not a single incident. It was a history. Crawford tried to speak. He claimed context. He mentioned standards. He said decisions were complex. Ethan listened briefly. Then he stopped him. He stated that the investigation would proceed immediately. He listed the steps: temporary suspension, restricted access, formal review. Everything followed protocol. Angela finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, clear, controlled. She did not condemn Crawford. She did not mention the shove. She did not reference herself. She said that the process would continue without exception. That was all. This is what real authority looks like. It does not shout to be heard. It does not need the room's approval. It operates through structure, through evidence, through discipline. Crawford's power had relied on uncertainty, on silence, on the assumption that no one important was watching. Angela had removed that assumption long before she entered the room. Patrol Unit B stood frozen, the weight of their earlier silence settling in. They had watched her fall. Now they were watching the system turn, not because of emotion, because of proof. Ethan concluded by stating that additional reviews would follow, not just of Crawford, of procedures, of oversight failures, of complicity. This was no longer about one person. It was about accountability. Angela met Ethan's gaze once more. He nodded. The moment passed. No applause, no dramatic exit, just a room forced to face itself. And in that moment, the truth became unavoidable. Power does not need to announce itself. It reveals itself when the system finally works the way it was always supposed to. Crawford's wrists were secured. The sound of the restraint was quiet, almost ordinary. No shouting followed, no dramatic reaction. Just a clear signal that his authority was no longer his. But the story did not end there, because once the focus moved away from him, the room revealed something else. The camera of attention shifted, not to the fallen, not to the man restrained, but to the people who had stood there the entire time. Patrol Unit B. They had watched everything. They had heard the insults. They had seen the shove. They had watched Angela hit the desk. And they had done nothing. Now they stood in a line of uneasy stillness. Some looked straight ahead, faces stiff. Some stared at the floor. One rubbed his hands together slowly, as if trying to wipe something away. These were not villains. They had not pushed anyone. They had not shouted. They had not written the policies. But they had been there, and that mattered. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because systems rarely collapse because of one person. They rot because many people decide to survive quietly inside them. One officer shifted his weight. He was younger than the others. His uniform was neat, his posture uncertain. He glanced at Angela, then at Ethan, then back at the floor. The silence stretched. He raised his hand slightly, then lowered it again. No one looked at him. He swallowed and tried once more. He stepped forward. His voice was low at first. He said he wanted to add something. He said he had been present during the incident. He said he had seen what happened. Every eye in the room turned toward him. The pressure was immediate. This was not courage rewarded. This was courage tested. He hesitated. His words slowed. He glanced sideways, gauging the reactions of his peers. They did not stop him, but they did not support him either. That was the cost. He continued anyway. He said the shove was intentional. He said there was no threat from Angela. He said no warning was given. Each sentence landed quietly, firmly. He did not dramatize. He did not accuse. He stated facts, and in doing so, he crossed a line that many never do. He refused to remain neutral. This is what most people misunderstand about harm inside institutions. The most dangerous moment is not when someone abuses power. It is when everyone else decides that intervening is too risky. The officers who laughed earlier said nothing now. The ones who looked away before remained silent. Their silence had changed meaning. Before, it protected Crawford. Now, it exposed them. Angela watched the young officer as he finished speaking. She did not nod. She did not praise him. She acknowledged him with a brief look. That was enough. Ethan recorded the statement. He did not rush. He documented carefully. The process moved forward. But something else lingered in the room. A realization. Crawford had thrown the shove, but the environment had allowed it. This is the truth that makes people uncomfortable. In broken systems, the most powerful force is not cruelty, it is compliance. The belief that staying quiet keeps you safe. The idea that looking away is not the same as agreeing. But silence has weight, and eventually it has consequences. The officers standing there understood that now. Not because they were being punished, but because the spotlight had widened. This was no longer a story about one man losing control. It was about a group that had learned to live with it. Angela spoke again. Her voice was steady. She said the investigation would not focus on one individual alone. She said accountability would include actions and inaction. She said silence would no longer be invisible. No threats followed. No raised voice. Just a statement of expectation. This was leadership. Not loud. Not emotional. Relentless. The young officer stepped back into line. His hands were shaking slightly. But he did not regret speaking. Others avoided his gaze. Some were thinking the same thought. Why didn't I say something sooner? This is the moment most people recognize too late, that doing nothing is also a choice, and every choice shapes the system you wake up to the next day. The room felt heavier now, but also clearer. The truth had expanded. It was no longer contained within one pair of hands. It belonged to everyone present. And that was the point, because justice is not only about stopping the one who strikes, it is about confronting the culture that taught everyone else to look away. The process continued. Names were noted, statements recorded, oversight activated. But something deeper had already shifted. The room would never feel the same again. Not because of fear, but because silence had finally been given a cost. Angela did not raise her voice. She did not look at Crawford with anger. She did not say a single word meant to humiliate him. That was what many expected. That was what some in the room were waiting for. A reaction, a release, a moment of satisfaction. It never came. Instead, Angela turned her attention to the process. She instructed Ethan to initiate a full internal review, not limited to one unit, not limited to one incident. A review of conduct, records, and prior complaints. Names were logged. Access cards were flagged. Several officers were placed on immediate administrative suspension pending investigation. There was no drama in how it happened, just procedure. That choice mattered. Because there is a difference between revenge and justice, even when both look similar from the outside. Revenge is emotional. It feels good in the moment. It gives the illusion of balance. Someone hurts you, and you hurt them back. Justice is slower, colder, less satisfying at first. Justice does not ask what feels right. It asks what prevents this from happening again. Angela understood that difference. She could have made an example of Crawford. She could have spoken sharply. She could have used the moment to assert dominance. She did none of that. Instead, she let the system respond. Not the broken version that had protected abuse, but the version designed to correct it. This is where many people misunderstand strength. They think strength is loud, immediate, visible. But the kind of strength that changes systems is quiet and disciplined. It resists the urge to react. The officers in the room began to realize what was happening. This was not about punishment alone. It was about structure. The investigation widened. Patterns were examined. Past decisions were pulled into review. Records that had been ignored were now read closely. This was not a purge. It was accountability. And accountability is uncomfortable because it does not stop with one person. Angela spoke again, briefly. She said no one would be judged by rumor or reputation, only by documented actions. She said the process would take time. She said outcomes would be final. No applause followed. No one smiled. That was the point. Justice is not meant to entertain. It is meant to restore order. Many people watching this story want the same thing. They want a clean ending, a clear villain, a satisfying downfall. Those moments feel good, but they do not fix what allowed the harm to happen in the first place. Angela did not confuse justice with vengeance. She did not turn pain into spectacle. She turned it into reform. This is what separates leadership from reaction. Anyone can respond in anger. Few can respond with restraint. That restraint was not weakness. It was control. And control is the foundation of real authority. The officers who had remained silent before now understood the shift. This was not about taking sides. It was about setting standards. And standards apply to everyone. The room felt different. Not lighter, not calmer, clearer. Because once justice moves beyond emotion, there is no hiding place. No one could argue bias. No one could claim personal vendetta. The process spoke for itself. This is why Angela's response mattered so deeply, not because it was dramatic, but because it was correct. She did not need to retaliate to prove her position. She let the law do that. That choice sends a message far beyond one building. It tells every person watching that justice is not about winning a moment. It is about protecting the future. Anger burns fast. Reform takes time. One feels good immediately, the other lasts. Angela chose the harder path, and in doing so, she made it clear that power, when guided by discipline, does not need to shout. It simply acts. That is the difference between a system that reacts and a system that heals. And that difference is where real justice begins. When the building finally grew quiet, Angela was alone. The lights were dimmer now. The hallways no longer carried voices or footsteps. The tension that had filled every corner earlier had moved on, replaced by stillness. She sat down. Only then did she touch the side of her head. The pain was there, dull, persistent, a reminder that control does not erase impact. No cameras followed her into that moment. No one was watching. This was the part people rarely see. Throughout the day, Angela had been described as calm, controlled, unshaken. Those words sound strong, but they hide a cost. Because calm does not mean untouched. It means restrained. Angela had learned that discipline long before this building, long before this position. Years earlier, when she was still climbing, she learned quickly that mistakes were not forgiven equally. She learned that raising her voice would be remembered longer than doing her job well. She learned that anger would be labeled, while silence would be tolerated. So she adjusted. She worked harder. She spoke less. She absorbed more. She learned to carry pressure without showing it, not because it was easy, because it was necessary. Being calm in spaces like this was not a personality trait. It was survival. She remembered moments from earlier in her career, meetings where her ideas were repeated by others and suddenly praised, situations where she was questioned twice as hard and trusted half as much. She remembered staying late, double-checking reports, proving competence again and again, always measured, always careful. That discipline had brought her here, but it had also left marks no one could see. Today's incident reopened those old lessons, not in memory, but in instinct. When Crawford lost control, Angela did not respond with emotion. She responded with restraint. Not because she did not feel anything, but because she knew the cost of letting that feeling show. This is what many people misunderstand about strength. They see composure and assume ease.
They see restraint and assume indifference.
They are wrong. Restraint is work. It is choosing control while absorbing harm. It is carrying pain quietly so the system does not collapse around you. That weight adds up. Angela knew that. As she sat alone, she allowed herself a moment. Not to break, just to breathe. The bruise would fade. The report would be filed. The reforms would continue. But the emotional toll would not vanish with the paperwork. And that matters. Because people like Angela are often praised for their strength, but rarely asked what it costs them. They are told to be resilient, to rise above, to stay professional. Few ask what gets buried along the way. Angela stood up slowly. She adjusted her jacket, straightened her posture. The armor went back on. Not because she wanted to hide, because the work was not finished. Tomorrow would bring meetings, reviews, pushback. She would need that calm again. Not as an image, as a tool. But the truth remains. Strength like this is not free. It is earned through endurance, through restraint practiced again and again, through moments where emotion is swallowed so progress can happen. Angela did not become unbreakable. She became disciplined. And discipline, when demanded constantly, leaves scars. That does not make her weaker. It makes her human. This is the part of leadership rarely shown. Not the authority, not the decisions, but the quiet cost of holding everything together. Angela understood that cost better than most, and she carried it anyway. Because some changes require someone willing to absorb the pressure so others don't have to. That is not heroism. It is responsibility. And it is heavier than it looks. Now take a moment and step back. The story did not begin with Angela's title. It did not turn because of a badge revealed at the right time, and it did not end simply because one man was exposed. The real question comes after all of that. What if tomorrow you were the one walking into that room? No escort, no protection, no hidden authority waiting to be revealed. What if there was no twist coming to save you? Angela's story is powerful because it shows what happens when the system is forced to confront itself. But most people who face unfair treatment do not get that moment of reversal. They walk in as themselves, and they walk out carrying the weight alone. This is where the story shifts from a single incident to something larger, because Crawford was not the only problem in that room. The silence mattered. The turned faces mattered. The hesitation mattered. The system did not fail because of one man's actions. It failed because of how many people allowed those actions to continue. That is the part that applies everywhere, in offices, in schools, in institutions built on rules and hierarchies. Unfairness rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly, supported by routine and comfort. Most people do not actively cause harm, they simply choose not to interrupt it. Angela's authority eventually corrected the situation, but authority is rare. Courage is not. And courage does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like speaking up when it feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it looks like refusing to look away. Sometimes it looks like questioning behavior that has been normalized. This story asks something uncomfortable of the viewer, not whether you would stand up if you had power, but whether you would stand up without it. Because justice is not only about outcomes, it is about moments. Moments where a decision is made to act or remain silent. Angela's experience shows what accountability can achieve, but it also exposes how fragile fairness becomes when it depends on position. That is why this story matters beyond its ending. It is not an invitation to feel satisfied. It is a reminder to stay alert. If this story made you angry, pause. Anger fades quickly. If it made you thoughtful, hold on to that. Awareness lasts longer. Ask yourself where silence has become routine in your own environment. Ask where small injustices are brushed aside as not worth the trouble. Ask what role you play when something feels wrong but familiar. Change rarely starts with punishment. It starts with recognition. Angela did her part by enforcing accountability at the top. The rest belongs to everyone else. Because the next time someone walks into a room like that, they may not have a title waiting to be revealed, and the response they receive will depend on who chooses to act. If this story challenged the way you see power, responsibility, or silence, share it, not to spread outrage, but to spread understanding. That is where real change begins.